and I'm delighted to join you for this webinar called Leading Constant Change. Change is never ending. It's neither good nor bad, it simply is. The question is, how do we manage it in ways that are sustainable and life-giving for the individual and transformative for faith communities and the people they serve? Leading is about moving from where we are and where we want to be. It's about moving from our present or current reality to God's preferred future. It's about moving ourselves and our organizations so that they're in alignment with our mission and our vision and our values. And I use this illustration of a bridge, that our task is that we are on one side, our current reality, and our goal is to get to God's preferred future for ourselves and our organizations. And then the challenge becomes is how do we build that bridge, construct that pathway that allows us to live into God's preferred future. And I would advocate that all work as leaders is spiritual work. It's a time of wondering what God is up to in our lives and ministries, a time to be aware of how the Spirit is blowing in and through our lives and our ministry settings. And it's a time of discernment to make sure that we are aligned with God's best intentions for ourselves in our particular ministries. And so as we talk today about leadership, I'd like to share with you, first of all, kind of four key elements, key truths related to leadership from my perspective. And the first one is that leadership is a choice. It's where we choose to be a person of influence, to make a difference. And our desire is to help people be different, to think different, and to do or act differently as a result. So leadership is about influence and transformation. In addition, I would advocate that leaders are forward-thinking. They are future-oriented and focused on looking beyond the horizon to imagine what might be and where God might be leading them in that context. In addition, I would advocate that leadership is all about building trust. And part of the ways that we exercise leadership is modeling the way for others. And finally, I would lift up that leadership comes with a recognition that we can't do it alone, that we need the gifts, the talents, the resources, the energy, the perspectives from other people. So leaders, by their very nature, have followers, people that buy into the mission, the vision of where the organization is going, and that they have gifts to offer, contribute, that help us live into that vision more fully. So leaders realize that you can't do it alone. And I want to go back one here. And also the three things that we're going to be covering or going to serve as lenses or frames for our conversation today is three facets of what it means to be a leader. And so we're going to spend a few minutes talking about what does it mean to be a visionary leader, a person that looks ahead, that shares a vision and invites other people to help live into it. And then we're going to spend some time talking about what it means to be an adaptive leader and how can we be nimble and adaptive and be able to make the necessary changes to get a better result. And finally, we'll spend some time exploring what it means to be a collaborative leader in this day and age. But we're going to spend our first few minutes actually talking about visionary leadership and begin with actually thinking about who are some of those people that have served as visionary leaders for us in society. And certainly we can point to people like Martin Luther King and his I Have a Dream speech and how he gave people a better vision, I would advocate, for this country and how we can live together and work together. Or we can think of John F. Kennedy in his inaugural address where he lifted up and challenged we as a nation to put a man on the moon within a decade. Or we can think of people like Mark Zuckerberg and how he changed how we communicate with one another through the launching and expansion of Facebook. We can think of people like Steve Jobs as being visionary leaders, individuals that cause us to find different ways to listen to music, to communicate with one another. Or we can also lift up people like Jeff Bezos, and through his work at Amazon, found new ways in which to deliver goods and services to we as a nation. And finally, we can lift up people like Elon Musk, who's in this picture, a person that helped launch SpaceX, a person that is responsible for the Tesla electric car, and is currently building the world's largest battery factory in Nevada right now. So these are all individuals that have exemplified visionary leadership. And so as we talk about that, what exactly does that look like in this day and age? And I would advocate, first of all, that visionary leaders are people that are grounded. They're grounded in their values, they're grounded in their primary purpose, and yet, beyond that, they're willing to change just about anything to get a better result or to live into that preferred future. And so you see on the slide here a picture of Tim Cook when asked about Apple's mission and values and how have things changed since Steve Jobs served as CEO. And so Tim Cook commented, "I don't think our values as an organization should change, but everything else can." So I think one of the challenges of being a visionary leader is to be attentive to what you hold on to and embrace, what grounds you, and also to be able to set aside and let go so that you have space and room and energy to embrace new ideas and new innovations. And so a question that I think many visionary leaders might ask, and I find myself doing it fairly often as a coach, is simply asking, is there a better way to achieve our purpose or our mission or our vision? Again, can we be married to our mission, but not necessarily to our models? And I was reminded as I look at these pictures of these telephone booths, the last time I was in London, there were these telephone booths sprinkled everywhere, but they certainly weren't to help people make phone calls or connect with each other. They were simply placed strategically around the downtown area to serve as photo ops for tourists that were in the area. And so is there still a need to communicate and connect with others? Absolutely. But we have found new ways to do that were more efficient and effective than the old-time telephone booths. And so I think also there's a number of things that have changed that we probably all related to. Here's two products that I used to own. The Sony Walkman, I had several versions of those. And then eventually they transitioned to the Discman. But I don't have any of those items anymore. They were first of all replaced by the iPod Classic, where I could carry 10,000 tunes within my pocket. And then eventually replaced by my smartphone, the iPhone. So all these items continued. The need, the desire to be able to listen to music and broadcasts, and yet there were different and more effective ways of doing that. Or we can point to Polaroid, who is known for their instant photography, where you push a button and within 60 seconds you have a nice picture of what you just took. And Polaroid, as well as Kodak, were both on the cutting edge of many of the digital initiatives and digital photography, but were sabotaged in many ways by their success. They did not want to give up their cash cow. They had had a past record that these products had served them well, but they weren't willing to give those up and embrace a new way of providing instant pictures for people. And other competitors took away that business for the most part from them. And so we have to be careful as visionary leaders that are we solving the right problems and dealing with the right issues? In this setting, people wanted access to instant pictures. It just didn't have to be the way that Polaroid provided it. So let us be careful to name those problems and those challenges us to hold on lightly to the best ways to reach them. I imagine a number of you also had Garmin's and other ways of routing your destinations to and from different places. And I know there's been times where I've been misdirected based on old maps. And just as sometimes we need to make sure that our, whether they're digital or paper copies, that our maps are current, we also need to update our mental models and our maps. And I would advocate that visionary leaders do this more intentionally and more frequently than non-visionary leaders. They're willing to unlearn and let go and to embrace new maps and models and new possibilities for how we might fulfill our primary purposes. And so as we also think about visionary leadership, we can look at some key characteristics. And so I'd like to share with you 6 of them. One is a pioneering spirit, a person that probably is more closely defined as a builder rather than a maintainer. A person that kind of pushes the envelope, willing to chart new courses, to try new things, to find a better way. It's something that energizes them, that pushes them, gives them a reason to get up for each and every day. These are people that also exude a powerful passion for what they do. And you typically know what they believe, what they value, what they're energized by, what their hopes are. And so there's a strong and clear and compelling passion that drives that pioneering spirit each and every day. And because of that passion, they're also willing to inspire a shared vision, to invite other people into the conversation, to share their dreams and hopes, and to learn from one another. But they are great communicators when it comes to sharing potential visions and their hope for preferred futures. And in that same context, they're lifelong learners, knowing that this is a process each and every day, that there are new opportunities to learn from one another, new opportunities to read and learn from books and conferences and what's in the newspaper, new opportunities to learn what just transpired in the last day. But these are people that are sponges for new knowledge and new ideas, and are willing to also reflect on what has happened and to find and explore new ways to get better results. In addition, these visionary leaders are risk takers. They're willing to have some skin in the game, to try new things, to risk failure. In fact, I would advocate that they probably live by the motto that they're willing to fail faster in order to succeed sooner. And lastly, they also serve as strategic planners. They are focused on finding better ways to do things. They focus on what matters most. And so they're very strategic in how they spend their time and their energy in finding better ways. So those are just a few ways to define visionary leaders. And a few ways that I think that we can exemplify some of those characteristics is, first of all, to get a balcony view. How might we either step aside or find a new viewpoint and new approaches for how we might move forward in ministry? Sometimes we need to see ministry from the ground level. Sometimes we need to see it from the 100-foot level. Sometimes we need to see it from the 10,000-foot level. But as leaders that are forward-thinking and visionary, we need to get a balcony view more often. And I would advocate for church leaders, this means we need to have a horizon of what our ministries might look like that goes beyond 30 days or 60 days and maybe even 360 days. But where do you think God is leading us 3 years or 5 years or 10 years down the road? Not that we have to have all those answers, but might we be looking a little farther down the road than we usually do on a regular basis? In addition, visionary leaders are people that acknowledge the loss that people will have as a result of change. But they also know that people do not fear the loss itself or the change itself, but they fear the actual loss. So we need to be attentive to what loss that people will experience and how we pay attention to that, and perhaps how some of that loss might be diminished by the benefits that would come about as a result of new innovations. But this is absolutely critical. People always like change if it's for the good, if it benefits them. It's the fear of loss that holds people back. And so before we move on to adaptive leadership, I have one question I'd like to ask you as a visionary person, and perhaps even to think about your church. Do you spend time or more time thinking back about what your church has done? Or do you spend the majority of your time thinking about what might be? Because I would advocate that most meetings I go to, it's primarily reporting about the past. It's looking in the rear view mirror. And I would suggest that we might become more visionary as a collective group of leaders if we are more intentional about changing the course of our agendas so that there was more time and more conversation to talk about possibilities and new initiatives and potential collaboratives and things like that as part of our meeting conversations. And we could stretch ourselves perhaps a little bit more also by making sure that we're reading some new articles and research that stretch our minds and imaginations to be more visionary. So consider how you might become a more intentionally visionary person, looking further down the road and imagining what God might be up to in your lives and your ministries. And so now at this point, we're going to transition to talking about the second lens of leadership, adaptive leadership. And so we describe adaptive leadership as the activity of mobilizing people to tackle tough challenges and problems and to do the adaptive work necessary to achieve progress and thrive. And so much of what we're talking about today is based on Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky's work that is found in their book, Adaptive Leadership. And let me give you another quote that I think better defines what this leadership looks like. It's about change that enables the capacity to thrive. New environments and new dreams demand new strategies and abilities, as well as the leadership to mobilize them. So we're talking about new ways of being, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing. And so how does that actually show up? And so I think there's 4 critical traits of adaptive leadership. And one of the most critical traits is actually preserving the essential. Just as we should be attentive to what's not working in our organizations, we need to be attentive to what is working. We need to be attentive to what those bright spots are. We need to be attentive to our core values, the things that make us strong, that have, make us great as an organization. How do we hold on to those bright spots? And I would advocate, how do we spend time actually building upon those, finding ways to go deeper with those things that have been life-giving and transformative. So we need to be aware of what we need to hold on to and to bring into the present and the future. And at the same time, then we need to be aware of what we should discard. And this is where congregations often get stuck. They might have had successful programs and ministries and activities they've done that served them well for several years. But times have changed. Demographics have changed. The church has changed. And some of the things that worked well for us 10 or 20 years ago no longer serve that same purpose or have the same impact. So how can we take time to celebrate those ministries for the way they serve people at that point in time, but be willing to discard and let them go, knowing that in a new day and age, there's new ways to fulfill our ministry that are more impactful. So we need to hold on to what's been essential and be willing to discard and name the unnecessary. In addition, as we think about being adaptive leaders and finding new ways to be and think and do, it's going to require some new capacities, some new skills, some new ways of thinking, some new knowledge. And so this means that we need to continue to be, like the visionary leaders, lifelong learners in developing skills. One of the most common job opportunities right now within churches is communication directors. because communication has changed so dramatically, and so many of us have not been really equipped with some of the new skills to communicate and many of the ways that are frequently used at this point. So we all need to be thinking about how we expand our capacities, both individually and organizationally. And lastly, we need to look at how do we continue to innovate via experience? How do we try on pilot projects? How do we test our assumptions and our hypotheses? Are we willing to set up some initial experiments that allow us to see what works, what doesn't, and what we can learn from them so that we can further refine them? So these 4 traits of adaptive leadership are absolutely critical. Preserve the essential, discard the unnecessary, expand capacities, and innovate via experience. And so we're going to spend a little time talking about some of the key defining elements of technical challenges as well as adaptive challenges. And technical challenges often can be solved with existing knowledge. It's usually just involving a little tweaking. In fact, our current knowledge is usually a springboard to some of the tweaks or the changes that we will make. The challenges are well defined and easy to repeat. So there's some order and consistency that allows us to improve those elements. They usually do not require significant changes in behavior. Again, it's more of a matter of incremental changes and tweaks, usually by the same individuals. And lastly, it does not require significant changes in attitudes and assumptions. So those are the technical challenges. And I would advocate that when we address technical challenges, for the most part, we're usually making things incrementally better. And they do serve a purpose. But we usually won't find exponential transformation by addressing simply technical challenges. So let's take a look at the adaptive challenges and some of the traits. First of all, many of them are hard to define. And there again, it's new things that are emerging. Sometimes it's hard to get your hands around it and try to figure it out. It requires new knowledge and new learning. One of the most important traits is that as leaders that we need to know what we don't know and then discover how we're going to find that information that's missing. It requires new ways of thinking and doing, new attitudes, new assumptions. So it requires us to be willing to look in the mirror and look at what works and what doesn't and why. And to ask that same question again, is there a better way? And in what ways do our assumptions hold us back? Same thing with our attitudes or past experiences. And again, adaptive challenges usually involve some type of experimentation because this is all new territory and we're not quite sure where it's going to go. But how do we tinker a little bit, try on, experiment, and based on the knowledge we gain from those successes and failures, that will help shape future experiments and adaptations. And so I think this is a helpful slide too as we think about being an adaptive leader and addressing adaptive challenges. And so here, as we're facing adaptive challenges, here's some indicators. If the solution requires operating in a different way than what's currently been done, is probably an adaptive challenge. If the problem and the solution require learning, it's probably an adaptive challenge. If the solution requires shifts in people's authority and responsibilities, it'll probably be an adaptive challenge. If the solution requires some sacrifice to past ways of working or living, it's probably an adaptive challenge. If the solution requires experimenting before you're sure of the answer, it's most definitely an adaptive challenge. And if the solution will take a long time and is connected to people's values, it most likely is an adaptive challenge. So as you look at those pieces, certainly we know that it's harder to change people's attitudes and assumptions and behaviors than just simply changing a few minor things. So know that adaptive challenges require time and persistence in order to fully overcome some of these changes in how we think and how we do in how we act on a regular basis. So, some basic definitions there. Let's talk about the intervention process. What does adaptive change actually look like? So there's three kind of critical steps that take place, and we're going to go even deeper than that in a little bit. But first of all, I think as we live into this adaptive mindset, the first thing we can do is become more intentional observers of the events and the patterns in our lives and our ministries, and take time to interpret what we're observing and developing multiple hypotheses about what's really going on. And this is a great way for us just to gain a better perspective and a kind of a current reality about our ministry setting, our societal setting, things like that. We must become good observers of our societal landscapes and our ministry settings. So secondly, as we have a greater understanding and appreciation of what's going on, then how do we design interventions or experiments based on these observations and intentions that have that give us an opportunity to test our assumptions and to, in essence, put our toe in the water and try some new ways that might be fruitful in moving forward. And then certainly as we do these interventions, there's going to be some responses by people. Some people are going to be excited and energized. Some are going to be excited and upset. There's going to be factions that emerge and different conversations. So we need to be attentive to what we're seeing, to how people respond to the changes that are taking place through these interventions. So, in fact, I would advocate in many churches, if there's no resistance, if there's no energy, no conflict, we've probably become too complacent. And so we should actually look at some resistance in some of these factions that come out of number 3 here as actually positive indicators that some change and discomfort is actually happening in our system that's going to bring about some new ways of moving forward. So now, if we really want to go deep with this, we can talk about this 9-step adaptive leadership process. And know that there are more details on the Surface to Soul website under the Empower section. But let me just give you a brief summary of here, knowing that you can gather more details. So when we talk about discern, this is simply, are we facing technical problems as well as technical fixes? Or are we facing adaptive challenges that require adaptive fixes? And keep in mind, in many cases, you'll be doing a little bit of both. You'll have both adaptive and technical challenges, and they will both need adaptive and technical solutions. So we need to discern what kind of problem are we seeking to solve, and is it technical or is it adaptive in nature? Secondly, we'll need to identify what's the significant adaptive challenge. We can't fix everything all at the same time, so what's the most pressing issue that we need to invest our time and energy into? And thirdly, and the interpretation. What are we observing about this adaptive change? Are there any parts of this adaptive challenge that are new and might need a different strategy than what's usually been done in the past? Who are the key stakeholders, and how might they be positively or negatively affected by this? How generalized is the urgency to do something? Or is it just, or is the timing not right to address it at this point? What are the adaptive elements of this challenge or situation? And what are the technical aspects? And is this the only organization that's being affected? Or is this something that's happening society-wide? And we need to be aware of that. Number 4, identify interventions. And this all deals with how could we address the adaptive challenge? Are there new ways to test what we are seeing and observing? And not only do we identify those interventions, but then we go into 5 and actually do some designing. Based on our observations and interpretations, we actually create some specific experiments that we can live into and observe and test in that process. And then we need to think hard about our framing, because thoughtful framing means communicating your interventions in a way that enables group members to understand what you have in mind, why the intervention is important, and how they can help carry it out. Well-framed interventions strike a chord with the people, speaking to their hopes and fears. It starts where they're at, not where you want them to be, and inspires them to move forward. So think about the balance between reaching people above and below the neck. So you have to identify both with the head and the heart in this process. And we need to frame issues in ways that people can constructively address them and find ways to move forward. And number 7, hold steady and stay the course. As you begin these new experiments and try on new things, and certainly if any of you have changed the time of a worship service or experimented with something at church, you're almost always going to be having some resistance. And so if we can name those things as pilot projects that we're testing something, indicate it's not necessarily set in stone, but we are going to try something for 3 months or 6 months, or we're going to do a series and then we'll small groups and then we'll reevaluate. But if we don't give the interventions sufficient time to take root or to learn from those experiences, because of people's interactions, we've kind of missed the boat. So be willing to hold steady, stay the course during your experimental stage. And then certainly during that experimental stage, that's where you're going to see some of the different factions, for and against, show up. Find ways to analyze those factions, find out what motivates them, discern what loss they might be experiencing, but use that as a way to learn and be part of this research process. And finally, focus on the work at hand. Many of the challenges that you're going to be seeking to address through your solutions are going to be related to attitude changes and behavioral changes. And just as we seek to lose weight or quit smoking or start new habits, we know that those things are harder to take root, to take hold. And we need to make sure we keep bringing people back to the most pressing issues, to the task at hand, and not allow those critical elements to be derailed by other less pressing, less important issues in that process. So hopefully this gives you just kind of a little overview of what this adaptive leadership process looks like. Hopefully you understand the difference between adaptive and technical challenges as well as solutions. But I feel if we're going to go deeper in this, we also need to tend to these 4 hindrances. And the first one is simply the failure to observe. What is going on right now in our ministry settings? What's working? What's not? Where does God seem to be present and where's the Spirit blowing? What are people talking about? What are people's habits and patterns and norms? What are kind of the rules that guide our worship, our service, our communication? So I think a critical element is simply to become acute observers of your congregational culture and the societal landscape. In addition to that is then the failure to interpret. So what does that mean? What are the implications? Certainly if we look at the advent of the iPhone that came out in June of 2007, I don't know many churches at that point were asking, what will that mean for how we communicate with one another? How will this mobile communication lead to perhaps a mobile faith? How will we engage with people in ways that we've never engaged with them before? What are the implications? So that's a really important question. How will this impact our ministry? How does it provide new opportunities? What disruptions might we see as a result of this new innovation? And then you see another one here too, the failure to intervene. And so as we see these observations, we do some interpretation, but then the question is, are we willing to experiment and try a few new things and seek to learn with some successes and learn as well as from our failures? So this willingness to experiment, are we willing to do that? And finally, the failure of will. I would advocate that one of the challenges I often see in congregations across the country is a a sense of a good enough mindset towards ministry excellence. And I think we've lost our will in some ways to do more excellent ministry, to find better ways of achieving our objectives, because these things require sacrifice. They move us beyond our comfort zone. They're not always going to work, so we're going to risk failure and ridicule. And so we need to be willing to kind of have a backbone and be willing to risk failure and be more willing to enter into those areas that are unknown for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of our purpose and our priorities. So a question I have for you is just simply, what are the challenges you're facing now? Which ones are adaptive? Which ones are technical? And how do you change those pieces? And this picture that you see right now is as a church in the Twin Cities. And they changed a number of things. They focused primarily, their conversations were about how do we get more people in the door? And what would reach out to them, and what would impact them, what would be relevant for them. And so they were acute listeners in this process. And there's some things that they made just technical changes to related to hospitality and their worship service, making it more user-friendly for people. But they also were willing to make some real changes. They invited people into a conversation that everyone in this church is part of the hospitality team. They're all charged with befriending and welcoming people, not just the ushers and the greeters. They were willing to invite people into the conversation, but everyone's an evangelist, and that everyone's home is a mission outpost. It's not just about inviting people into the church, but understanding their homes as churches too. So how do we be attentive to the challenge that we have, find new ways of addressing those challenges that will often require new ways of thinking and being and doing? And so lastly, we're going to be spending a little time talking about collaborative leadership. We talked a little bit about being visionary leaders, people looking further down the road, being imagining what God might be up to. We spent some time looking at adaptive and technical changes and challenges. And now we're going to spend a few minutes talking about collaborative leadership. So as we talk about collaborative leadership, we're going to talk about that in 4 different ways. We're going to talk about pathways of understanding. Collaborative leadership is one way of getting things done. And as we talk about collaborative leadership, I want you to think about collaboration in a variety of ways. Certainly, rather than just working as an individual, how do we collaborate as a team? Whether that means increasing the collaboration that happens among a church staff, increasing the collaboration that takes place between the staff in the church council or the board, or increasing the collaboration that takes place between board members or staff with different ministry team leaders. In addition, we can go broader then, say what does this mean for how we might collaborate more intentionally with organizations in our community, with other congregations or faith communities in our area? How might we collaborate with colleges, schools, mission organizations, seminaries? So this idea that how do we collaborate and with whom do we collaborate in that process? And there are times where to accomplish what we hope to accomplish, sometimes collaboration is not the most effective approach. Sometimes we need to do this individually by ourselves. Sometimes time is of the essence and we can't pull together an effective collaboration. So the first question we need to find out is, who do we seek to collaborate with on what issues, and is this the right setting or the right project in which to enter into some forms of collaboration? So think about the approaches or the pathways in which you want to enter into collaboration. In that same vein, I think we need to look at who are the partners. And I'm firm believers that for partnerships to work, for collaboration to work, people need to have a common goal, a common vision. They don't always have to have a complete set of similar values or similar even theological beliefs, but it has to be crystal clear. What are we trying to accomplish, and are we on the same page? And is that so compelling for us that we're willing to overlook some of those other items? Also, partnerships many times go down the drain if there isn't a willingness to be both a giver and a taker, to share control, share power, share communication, share insight, be open to new ways of doing things. So if you're in collaborative settings that do not involve a sense of mutual respect and admiration, that do not involve shared power and control and consistent communication, it may not be a good fit. Also know that partners can be at different settings. I've worked in a couple congregational settings where some pastors that would have been delightfully wonderful to partner with, but because of different timing issues in their life and their ministry setting, it just wasn't the right time. So we need to look at timing issues as well. And then also think about the projects. If there's an area where I felt collaboration broke down, it's because the projects were too broad in scope or too vaguely defined. And usually most partnerships start out small, do a little bit of that experimental stage, find ways to kind of dance with one another, learn about each other's strengths and their weaknesses and their quirks. And so start with some small or a series of small projects, and then gradually build into something more significant as time goes on. And there again, is it real clear about what you seek to accomplish with the different events or projects or tasks that you might be entertaining as partnership or collaborative events? And finally, I invite you to think about promotion or communication. One of the things that often gets discounted is, even though we might have the right things to collaborate on, the right people at the table, the right scope of the projects, many projects and collaborative efforts kind of go down the drain because they haven't figured out communication. And it relates to how are decisions made? How will they be communicated? How do we keep the key stakeholders in the loop? Who will be sending out this information? How quickly will it be disseminated? What issues need all stakeholders to be involved with it? Which issues can be addressed with individually with key point people? So the issue of promotion and communication is absolutely critical. I remember working with in a collaborative effort in South Minneapolis, and one of the biggest challenges we had is, again, we had a common vision around some youth and family ministry issues, had passionate partners, had clearly defined projects, but it was the communication that broke down. And partly as many of the churches needed information ahead of time to make sure they get in their newsletters and get it to their council members and things like that. And some of the partnering organizations really struggled with providing consistent information that continued to create glitches and hiccups in how we work together. So think of those 4 key areas. These pathways, are these the right things in which we want to collaborate on and go deeper with? Do we have the right partners at the table that are there primarily because they're passionate and they bring the right skill set and the gifts and the perspectives? Are they only there simply because of the position they hold in their church or their community setting? Are the projects sufficiently defined and the specific charges and the outcomes clearly identified so people know what they're shooting for? And finally, is there good communication? So those are kind of some specific ways to be attentive to as you seek to collaborate with team members, with council, with boards, and others. And I just want to lift up a couple other absolutely critical ones we've seen that have supported effective collaborative efforts. And the first one, again, is just clearly defined outcomes. I think everyone needs to be clear about what's the win for them, because it has to be a win-win for all parties. And if it's not a win-win for everyone, you shouldn't be entering into a collaboration. But what you're trying to achieve is clearly defined. And then you can certainly have some openness about what the models or the methods or the approaches are, but absolutely critical. You're seeking to accomplish the same thing in that process. And in this picture, I lifted up simply the fisherman with the fishing line getting caught up, which is a common occurrence for me when I go fishing. But this idea that so often we need to separate the issues and just kind of say, what exactly are we trying to accomplish here? So fuzzy outcomes usually lead to fuzzy communication and misunderstandings and lack of appropriate expectations. And then we spend all our energy trying to figure out these pieces, where it's much easier to put it into paper, lay it out what we're hoping, have people sign off on it, actually go through it point by point by point, and you'll be fine. You'll realize just how much clearer everyone will be at the end. And also, you'll find in many settings after you've walked through this, hey, this is not the right thing for us to partner on. So it becomes a win-win for everyone in that setting as well. Another key success factor, the well-managed communication. You might have some specific measuring tools. This is when how decisions will be made. This is where they will be made. Here's the people that maybe need to sign off or be aware of them. Here's how frequently communication will be sent out. Here's the deadlines for articles in our newsletters, whatever it is. But to have a kind of a one-page management plan that becomes part of the collaborative process is really critical as well. And I would even, and some of these things are even just basic elements, even think within your congregation. What do your reports look like that staff provide to the board? What information are they looking for? When do the different ministry teams meet? What information is communicated with people? Where is it posted or found afterwards? Where is it archived? All those type of questions lead to effective collaboration. And certainly we have a number of tools to help you do that even better than you are now. And then finally, this key success factor number 3, the timing and the people were right. Just go back to that part. I want people that are part of collaboratives, and I also want to be that. And on a scale of 1 to 10, if I'm not passionate about a particular area where I want to collaborate on, I probably shouldn't be part of it. It has to be an 8, 9, or 10 if I'm going to be willing to invest the time and energy to make it thrive. So think about if you have the right people that are based on their gifts, their passions, their energy level, those key elements. And then think about the timing. If you have a church that's in the process of merging, it's probably with another church or an organization, that's probably not the right time to add another collaborative project with them. If you're seeking to launch some new initiatives and you know that your board is going to be turning over 2 months from now, it might make sense to wait 3 months and get them oriented before starting that piece. So think about how timing and people play into the decisions on moving forward in collaborative ventures. And lastly, I think a question that is always important to ask in collaboratives: who am I in this picture? What is it that I want out of this collaborative venture? What do I have to offer? And what do you need to thrive in this collaborative effort? What do you need communication-wise? What do you need related to trust? What do you need regarding what the outcomes are that you'd be sufficiently energized by? But this is really an absolutely critical question, because we should always know what we have to offer and what we need in order to make it a win-win situation. And so as we kind of wrap up our time today, I just want to revisit a little bit of what we've discussed in our time together. Again, talking about leadership is a choice. Leadership is about influence and transformation and making a difference. It's about being forward-thinking and future-oriented. It begins with building trust and modeling the way for other people. And it ends with a realization that we can't do it alone, that there's a reason for us to invest and collaborate and work together towards a common cause. And so as we talked about this visionary leader, I have 3 questions for you. How might you think bigger, broader, bolder, a little bit farther down the road? How can you partner with God and imagine what might be for yourself in your ministry setting? When it comes to being an adaptive leader, how might you become more adaptive in your own setting? What new skills, what new knowledge might you need to learn? And what are some of the attitudes and assumptions you hold that perhaps no longer serve you, that you need to let go of in order to do your best work in the future? And finally, as you think about being a collaborative leader, how willing are you to give up control and share power with other people? How well do you communicate your intentions, your plans? Are you willing to be a team player for the sake of the common cause, or do you work better just on your own individual projects? But think about how you work in the role of a collaborative leader, and how your ministry might benefit from collaborating more intentionally with other team members, with other stakeholders within your church, and perhaps with other stakeholders in your community. So those are the things that we've covered today. And my final thought for you is simply, if we talk about leadership as a process of spiritual discernment, it's related to, and it's a spiritual process period, then a closing question I'd simply leave with you. What is God up to in your situation, in your setting? What is God up to in your life? What is God up to in your congregation? What is God up to in your household setting? And what is God up to in your community? So may God continue to guide you and bless you as you find ways to be a visionary leader, an adaptive leader, and a collaborative leader. This is Jim Ledoux with Vibrant Faith, and it's been a delight to spend this hour with you. God's blessings to you and your families. Bye-bye.